Today, we're very fortunate to have with us a distinguished expert in the field of law, partner at JSA Advocates Associates, Mr. Vishnu Sudarsan over here with us to share his views and his insights, particularly with regard to changes in the supply chain, the value chain, and the logistics sector as a whole. So, without further ado, there's been a lot of government goodwill when it comes to making changes within this particular sector. Within just the last year, we've seen the government enacting the National Logistics Policy, the PM, the Gati Shakti scheme, the ULIP, in addition to schemes that were already there, the Sagarmala, the Bharat Fund. Where do you think India is poised right now? How much strides have been taken by the government to improve the efficiency in this sector?
From an overall perspective, today as we look at the policy landscape of the overall demand centers from supply chain construct perspective or restructuring the supply chain, India is very well poised. From the perspective of overall policy initiatives, I think the government has done enough and more. Gaps which were there, they have been plugged. Now it's in terms from a policy. From an implementation perspective, they are underway and they will take some time. Be that be Gati Shakti, the national logistics policy, the ease of doing business in India in terms of bringing in changes at a rapid pace to make sure that the business efficiency is taken care of. So I think at an overall level, we are moving in the right direction. But the issue now is to move forward from the base level that's been set up, move into implementation mode, look at bringing in more PPP investments and not rely on only more in hand, which is hybrid annuity model, which is more or less akin to an EPC pay. Government's job should now be to bring in more private sector investment, get the assets up and running, and then bring efficiency in the sector. Asset creation at one level is happening, especially if you look at the road sector and the network. Even if you look at the dedicated freight corridor network, asset creation is happening on a HAM model at a very rapid pace. Of course, cost overrun, project overrun in a project of this nature are bound to happen. No economy in the world is there without facing these issues. They've all faced it. And these are issues that are bound to come up, and we are trying to deal with it in a most pragmatic manner, be that be in terms of technology, be that be in terms of interministerial coordination, be that be in terms of creating the right framework for rolling out these projects, be that be in terms of the Delhi-Mumbai corridor, a scheme was created, and then gone ahead and started doing. Or even look at the National Highway Infrastructure Investment Trust, the trust was there. They are moving in and expanding the asset creation using different tools and vehicles. There's enough that's been done. Now, the last leg that needs to be done is a very robust PPP framework and a policy to attract private sector investment and to the creation of the asset. That risk has to be now passed.
You mentioned something very interesting, the dedicated freight corridor, which is, I think, one of the largest investments by the Indian government of all time. It's huge and it really has the potential to shift cargo transport from road to rail. And of course, there'll be efficiencies created there, there'll be reduced pilferage. The entire DFC from at least the northwest corridor is electrified, so it's much more sustainable as well. But in terms of pricing, perhaps is there any scope wherein there could be DFC rail cargo tariff rationalization?
I think that's the next step. As we move forward with the asset creation and moving into operation phase, we should look at creating an independent regulatory framework, especially in terms of tariff and tariff rationalization, tariff principle, bringing in efficiency, bringing in competitiveness, bringing in predictability, stability. Look at the power sector. That's a classic example where the regulators first came in 1993, then 1998, and then under the 2003 Act, then moved towards competitive bidding, but the tariff principles were set first. And then we brought in competitive bidding. So that brings in, not that power sector is the best example, but that's where we can draw a lot of learnings from, both good and bad. The tariff should be educated, how tariff should be looked into. At the end of the day, the tariff is no investor or no government is looking to do charity at the end of the day. Let's be very clear. It's an asset, it's a national asset, it has to be used in the best possible way. And that means the objectives of the government will be very different from a socialist perspective, from a welfare perspective. Whereas from the private sector, the objectives will be very different in terms of the securing the return on the capital. It's about sweating the asset in the most optimal manner. They're conflicting interests. So it's best left if there is an independent economic regulator who's adjudicating on these aspects in the most efficient manner. One is the dispute resolution aspect. The second is mostly in terms of tariff regulation. Do you want to go down the route of what's there in the concession framework for highways, which is tariff regulation by concession? NHAI comes up with a toll notification based on the statutory principles which are embedded in law, which provides for a reasonable return. No one has ever looked at it, but it provides for a reasonable return on capital employed in terms of tariff regulation and NHAI. Or do you go towards a model which is there in ports now, dismantle, go ahead and let there be private play and market forces determine the tariff? Or do you look at a model which is there in airports like ERA, which again gives you a certain rate of return and regulatory principles on which tariff is regulated, or even telecom or electricity? So you have three different models.
Yep.
One is an independent regulator does it. The second is the authority itself does it. And the third is where there is an economic independent regulator coming in. So what kind of principle do you want to do? History has shown, even if you look at the telecom sector, despite all the challenges that are there, and we have perhaps the most competitive economy when it comes to telecom tariff, and with the highest ARPU still, an economic regulator makes sense because tariff is not a question of administration. It's not a question of bureaucracy. It's not a question of private sector. It's a question of optimal sweating of the asset for maximum return. So therefore, economic regulator is to be.
I completely agree with you. I think this will also really increase investor confidence in some set a procedure which is independent, which will be fair as well. Right now, most of the cargo transportation that happens in this country is based on road transportation. And if there is a shift from road to rail, that would really improve efficiencies across the entire sector. But I mean, the road transportation will always be a fundamental aspect in India as well. Is it possible that instead of having trucks moving like large distances, the focus instead of only on last mile connectivity?
India is interesting, given its geography, given its spread, given the way the asset development has taken place. There's role for each one of these multimodal transports to play.
Yeah.
The question is, where do you want to rely more on roads versus where do you want to rely more on rails? Once you have already got a dedicated freight corridor coming in, creating a parallel network for roads there does not make sense.
Yeah.
But what you try to mention is more in terms of last mile connectivity, or where there is a basic scenario where it makes sense to go in for roads which is going to be cheaper than, not because only in terms of cost. One is in terms of total simplistic cost measurement. The second is on a life cycle cost basis. The third is the cost benefit analysis in terms of actual benefit that you are deriving from the project.
Yeah.
If it's in the hinterlands and it does not make sense and the demand centers are being limited and you're trying to create a logistics hub, for instance, in terms of an evacuation hub, there it makes sense perhaps to go into roads. But predominantly we should be using different models of transport with heavy reliance on roads, heavy reliance on railways, and heavy reliance on electric mobility.
Yes.
Coming.
Yeah.
But railways should be the driver with the others boosting.
Yeah.
As we move forward.
Completely agree. I'd like to thank you once again for sharing these insights with us. I think they were really useful, particularly from this entire concept where there's been so much that's been done by leading up to. There's been so many changes. So it's, I think, a really good opportunity to sort of take stock of what's been happening in the sector. So thank you very much for that.
Lovely speaking to you. We move towards a paradigm shift in terms of economic.
That is the whole purpose.
Yeah.